Okay, obviously the whole Jeffrey Epstein file fiasco of 2025 is still dominating the news cycle, and I've already done multiple videos about who he was and what the files actually were. But today I want to talk about what happens next, because every single thing that I see right now points to one particular outcome, which cannot be accepted in any capacity whatsoever if it does end up being the way that things play out. And right now it seems abundantly clear, in my opinion, that this is what they're trying to do. Let me just start by clearing up a few misconceptions, I'll call them, because I hear these things repeated extremely often all over social media, and the way that people seem to be talking about them derails any further discussion by misunderstanding pretty critical factors. Misconception number one: Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump were friends, okay? Very close friends. They have each, on multiple separate occasions, referred to each other that way. They've attended exclusive parties together. They've ridden on Epstein's private plane, something like 8 times as per the manifest. And if the Wall Street Journal is to be believed, Trump even gave Epstein a birthday card at one point, intimating that they share wonderful secrets together, a fact that is now heavily disputed and Trump is suing them over. To whatever extent you want to argue about it, the simple stone cold reality here is that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were close with each other, period, at least for a while. But one of the biggest misconceptions I keep hearing over and over is that Trump found out what Epstein was, that is, the worst scum on earth, which is a very deliberate choice of words I'm going to come back to later on. And after learning that, he banned him from attending Mar-a-Lago and severed all connections. Yeah, that is entirely incorrect as per Trump's own statements. I don't know where this misconception was born initially, but the banning of Epstein from Mar-a-Lago only occurred because, quote, he did something that was inappropriate. He hired help, and I said, don't ever do that again. He stole people that work for me, and I said, don't ever do that again. He did it again, and I threw him out of the place. End quote. Now, that's already wildly different than finding out what Epstein was and taking a moral stand against him, but it gets worse because Epstein and his co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell would sometimes recruit their victims from Mar-a-Lago, which means that while Trump is openly stating that the split occurred because Epstein was stealing help, what he's actually saying is that even though Epstein was grooming victims from his resort, the real reason he was banned from the property is the fact that his servants were being poached. From his own mouth, the ban of Jeffrey Epstein from Mar-a-Lago only occurred because Epstein hired help, which was inappropriate. Here's an extremely recent audio segment from the White House itself, as of today, actually.
Mr. President, Epstein has a certain reputation, obviously. But just curious, were some of the workers that were taken from you, were some of them young women?
Some of them.
Were some of them young women?
Well, I don't want to say, but everyone knows the people that were taken. And it was the concept of taking people that work for me is bad. But that story's been pretty well out there. And the answer is yes, they were.
Yes, they were young women?
What did they do?
In the spa.
In the spa?
Yeah, people that work in the spa. I have a great spa, one of the best spas in the world at Mar-a-Lago. And people were taken out of the spa, hired by him. In other words, gone. And other people would come and complain, this guy is taking people from the spa. I didn't know that. And then when I heard about it, I told them, I said, listen, we don't want you taking our people, whether it was spa or not spa. I don't want him taking people. And he was fine, and then not too long after that, he did it again, and I said, out of here.
Mr. President, did one of those stolen, persons, that include Virginia Jeffrey?
I don't know. I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people, yeah. He stole her. And by the way, she had no complaints about us, as you know. None whatsoever.
Pretty clear, except let's go even further. There's an omnipresent problem now because the story just keeps on changing. According to a Miami Herald article from 2021, quote, Trump publicly disavowed Epstein a day after the financier's arrest on July 11th, 2019, saying in the Oval Office that the two hadn't spoken in 15 years after a falling out. He has also claimed that Epstein was never a Mar-a-Lago member, end quote. But according to other club members, contained in a book called The Grifters Club, quote, Trump kicked Epstein out after Epstein harassed the daughter of a member, end quote. Further down, according to investigative reporter Sarah Blasky, quote again, such an act could irreparably harm the Trump brand, leaving Donald no choice but to remove Epstein, end quote. This is very interesting to me, okay? Because while a hefty amount of the general public believes that Donald Trump fully understood who Jeffrey Epstein was and severed ties with him as a result, right? Like a moral issue, the truth is very clearly not so simple. According to Sam Nunberg, a Trump campaign official cited by the New York Times in 2019, quote, Mr. Trump assured Mr. Nunberg that he had barred Mr. Epstein from entering his clubs after Mr. Epstein had tried to recruit a woman who worked at Mar-a-Lago. Trump said, I kicked him out of the clubs when this stuff became public, and I made sure NBC knew, end quote. See, that's different yet again, insinuating that Trump only banned Epstein from the property after the first public revelations of his crimes in 2005. The story just keeps changing. So how are we supposed to believe any of it? If you go back to the actual White House transcripts from July of 2019, speaking to the press on the South Lawn, Trump said, quote, in response to a question asking with regard to Jeffrey Epstein, did you have any suspicions that he was molesting young women, underage women? Quote, no, I had no idea. I had no idea. I haven't spoken to him in many, many years, but I didn't have no idea, end quote. I could keep going. The number of discrepancies here make me think that the real answer is something that he never ever wants to talk about truthfully or fully. But the point I'm trying to make is that Trump enjoys an extreme, absolutely extreme, delusional level of misinformed support from his audience, who believe that he banned Jeffrey Epstein from Mar-a-Lago in a prescient maneuver because he fully understood what Epstein was. He knew that he was a creep, and he wanted to create distance between them. That's misconception number one. It simply doesn't appear to be the case. Misconception number two, however, is far more important. You can't go 5 minutes while discussing Jeffrey Epstein without hearing something vaguely akin to the following. Well, the Democrats had the list for 4 years. Why are we only hearing about it now? Don't you think if they had anything they could ever use against Trump, that they would have already done it? Or something very, very similar to that. And on the most basic level, like the really rudimentary level, it almost kind of sounds like it makes sense. Just one problem, because there were two cases, Epstein and Maxwell, separately. So the bulk of the files relating to Epstein were under court-ordered seal until 2024. And even then, Maxwell continues to file appeals even now, which means that a huge amount of what we colloquially refer to as the Epstein Files were not actually available at all to the prior administration across branches of government. That's the important thing, by the way, right? Across branches of government. These were sealed files, part of an active criminal investigation, and we're only now getting to the point where we can seriously talk about having these things released publicly because that's how the system works. Misconception number two is that the Epstein files can't possibly be damaging for Trump because if they were, they'd already have been weaponized. But once again, the facts on the ground do not fully support that idea. Anyway, this is already dragging on longer than it should with a lot of background information because the actual topic I want to focus on isn't what has happened. It's what can't happen, despite the fact that every single indication out there seems to point to the fact that it will probably happen. It's pretty simple, honestly, but what can't happen is pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell. Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, supporting the idea that if this were to happen, it would be politically catastrophic for Trump. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson has said that he believes her sentence was a pittance. She deserves life in prison as opposed to just 20 years. There were as many as 1,000 victims of hers. And yet when repeatedly asked about this, Donald Trump has consistently said, I'm allowed to do it, in reference to a presidential pardon. Yeah, dude, no shit, Donald. Of course the president is allowed to pardon people, a fact that he well knows, considering the way that he uses it, which I'll touch on at the end of the video. But this is a situation where he should not, and I would argue politically cannot, without doing kind of irreparable self-inflicted harm to his presidency, agenda, support base, all of it. I'm going to go rapid fire here to try and put together a context snapshot, I guess I'll call it, for people who don't follow this kind of stuff as closely. Here goes. According to the New York Times, 100,000 pages of Epstein files were being frantically combed over by the FBI, specifically for the purpose of flagging Trump's name when it appeared, as well as other prominent individuals. This is supported by a prior letter from the Judiciary Committee, Senator Durbin's office, which states, quote, according to information my office received, Attorney General Bondi then pressured the FBI to put approximately 1,000 personnel in its Information Management Division, IMD, including the Records/Information Dissemination Section, RIDS, which handles all requests submitted by the public under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, and Privacy Act, on 24-hour shifts to review approximately 100,000 Epstein-related records in order to produce more documents that could then be released on an arbitrarily short deadline. Further down, my office was told that these personnel were instructed to flag any records in which President Trump was mentioned. End quote. Cool. So the Epstein files are being held back on purpose and frantically dissected repeatedly so that they can flag every single time that Trump's name shows up, personally. But at the same time, Ghislaine Maxwell is meeting with the DOJ under a limited immunity agreement to give more information about her and Epstein's numerous, almost uncountable crimes, while the president repeatedly says, I'm allowed to pardon her. The person that she's meeting with, that's Deputy Director Todd Blanche, Trump's former lawyer from the hush money criminal trial in New York. Essentially, the president's former lawyer, now deputy at the DOJ, is meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman he has said, I wish her well about on multiple occasions after she was indicted for child sex trafficking, such as this one here in the White House press archives, or this one here during an interview with Axios, which has oddly been made private on YouTube now, but you can still find it on the Wayback Machine. So as the president wishes her well and says he's allowed to pardon her, his own former lawyer holds meetings after the FBI combed 100,000 pages of evidence against the sex trafficker, flagging every time that they found his name. It gets better, though. Did you know that Ghislaine Maxwell, as per the 2020 indictment in the Southern District of New York, didn't just face charges of sex trafficking? She also faced multiple perjury charges, which were only dropped as a result of her conviction on the more serious charges. The DOJ is meeting with a sex trafficker who has twice perjured herself, inflicting untold harm on as many as 1,000 victims, but the president wishes her well. Fantastic. We've already cycled through multiple different iterations of the argument, okay? First, it was the Epstein files need to be made public, with media stunts by the White House pretending that they were doing something about it. Then we get the now famous memo from the FBI and DOJ saying, there's nothing to see here. There is no list, no more investigation, it's over. After multiple high-level officials flip-flopped back and forth between the files are on my desk, there's a truckload of evidence, over to the files don't exist. And for those of you out there with a sliver of functional memory, before all of that, they were exchanging memos about how the FBI was withholding the files in the first place that don't exist, that are on the desk, that have Trump's name. Yeah, there's additional reporting from the New York Times that Trump was specifically informed by Pam Bondi that his name is in the Epstein files, which he denied, obviously, right before he went down the rabbit hole of claiming that the files do exist, but now they're a Democrat hoax, and his name was planted in them. Quote, well, I haven't been overly interested in it. You know, it's a hoax that's been built up way beyond proportion. I can say this, those files were run by the worst scum on earth. They were run by Comey, they were run by Garland, they were run by Biden, and all of the people that actually ran the government, including the auto pen. They can easily put something in the files that's a phony, end quote. The files don't exist, the files do exist. The files are a Democrat hoax. The files have fake names. Let's meet with the sex trafficker who perjured herself and get to the bottom of whose names are actually in the files, which are a hoax, which don't exist. And the president personally wishes her well multiple times. What the fuck do we think is actually happening right now? For anyone who needs it, I'm going to spell it out for you. Trump's name is in the files everywhere. Trump was close friends with Epstein. Maxwell is now saying whatever she can to get immunity, and it feels like, I certainly hope not, but it most definitely seems to be, that Trump is about to pardon her in a desperate attempt at shifting the narrative. Remember that phrase I used earlier as we talked about the misconceptions around why Trump revoked Epstein's membership to Mar-a-Lago? The misconception is that Trump revoked his membership because he figured out he was the worst scum on earth. But that's not what happened. In Trump's mind, the convicted sex trafficker and her accomplice, responsible for horrifying crimes against hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children, they're actually not the worst scum on earth. He wishes them well. The worst scum on earth are the Democrats. This cannot happen. Trump is already pardoning a multitude of criminals that do not deserve it. And I'm not talking about the January 6th situation either, which is a political lightning rod. I'm talking about white-collar criminals who donated millions to his campaign. I'm talking about bank fraud perpetrators and securities violations with tens of millions in damages, where the pardons end up denying their victims restitution. I mean, for fuck's sake, he even pardoned a company, HDR Global, so that they could avoid a $100 million penalty, at the same time talking about how broke America is. So let's pardon this fraudster company so it doesn't have to pay $100 million to America in penalty. Like, it's unbelievable. But all of that pales in comparison to pardoning perhaps the worst child sex trafficker alive today, in modern memory for that matter, just to try and dodge a scandal. It is painfully obvious that the administration is mishandling the Epstein situation, but pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell is a bridge too far. No rational person can look at this and see anything other than obvious corruption. And not even the most politically captured cult member can see this without squirming, uncomfortably, and they know it, as the narrative contorts itself, contradicting and reshaping what we're being told to think in such a blatantly obvious way, it is unignorable. I hope I'm wrong about this, but the situation that I see unfolding is soft preparation for a presidential pardon, or even a Supreme Court decision because of the sweetheart plea deal that gave immunity to all of his co-conspirators from back in the day. Something that releases Ghislaine Maxwell and obfuscates the uncomfortable scrutiny which is currently being directed at the president. Again, I hope I'm wrong, but this cannot happen. A pardon of Ghislaine Maxwell, or her not serving her full sentence, cannot happen. I guess we'll see. That's it. If you want to support the channel, you can check out the links down below. A special VPN deal. I know my British viewers are contending with a need for that recently. Channel memberships, locals and Patreon, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Question everything, and have a nice night.